Hi, and welcome to Best in Tesla. So, we have some disturbing things being said in the mainstream media by automotive analysts that can really lead people in the wrong direction. And it feels very much like DEJU VU from back in the days with Nokia. It is exactly the same things they are saying about legacy automakers than was said about Nokia. It is like the analysts haven't learned anything from Nokia or any other disruption that has happened. And at the same time, we have Jim Farley saying in an interview with Sandy Monroe what keeps him up at night. And that is the huge ramp of EV production they have to do. As he said, just think of the challenge the assembly line has to go through in their 60 factories. Exactly. What Ford and GM has planned to do is a much bigger task than what Tesla has done. But Tesla's target for 2020 back in 2014 was absurd. But when it is Ford or GM making a target that is multiple times bigger, the analysts don't even raise an eyebrow. So let us raise that eyebrow here in this video, because something is not right and Jim is feeling it. So let's check it all out and let's dive right in. Let's start with this article from a German news outlet that I have Google translated. Car stocks are considered underestimated, where most analysts advise to buy. Despite record profit, German car manufacturers are punished on the stock exchange. Many analysts find this absurd. Just like it was absurd for Tesla to get to 500,000 units sold in 2020, right? They see the corporations well positioned even in time of crisis. I don't really think this is the case. I would not recommend people buying old Legacy's stock at this point. I am of course not a financial advisor, so what do I know? But yes, some of them might be seeing record profits, but that is not equal to they will survive. You actually see this quite often when disruptions happen. The companies that have been disruptive have some of their best years just before they shut down, because they just work harder at what they know and therefore get better results. But they never changed, and that was what killed them in the end. Like Nokia CEO said back in 2013 when they filed for bankruptcy, "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. If you don't change, you shall be removed from the competition." I actually think this old article shared with me by Stocker Auto on Twitter is such a great comparison on what happened to Nokia and what has happened to the legacies right now. So just like the article about the German automakers, the auto analyst right now sees their falling stock price of the old legacy automakers as a buying opportunity. Well, so did many analysts think about Nokia in 2010. Only 3 years before they filed for bankruptcy, Nokia share have dropped 30% over the last 2 months as new rivals Apple and Google have gained ground in the fatter margin smartphone industry. But analysts are starting to see the sharp fall as a buying opportunity. Oh boy. Investors and analysts point to Nokia's leading position in emerging market and the strong manufacturing and sales network as the key strengths for the company. Wow, this is pretty much identical to what we hear automotive analysts saying about legacy automakers versus Tesla. It was also the old guys' many factories that was an asset, right? Until we saw Volkswagen having to spend $1.3 billion to upgrade their existing ICE factories to become an EV factory. Pretty much the same amount that Tesla uses to build a whole new factory a more efficient factory. So we clearly see the old factories are not an asset but a problem, as Jim Farley himself said in the interview with Sandy Monroe when he was asked what keeps him up at night. And Jim said,
"That's the thing that I'm the most concerned about. Is that what keeps you awake at night?" So.
For me, the most important thing is to set up the company so we have the scaling capacity to 2 million in the next 4 years. Now it's less than 4 years, 3.5 years. 2 million is a really aggressive number for us because we only make, well, last year we made 4 million, 4.5, constrained by chips. Normal year, 6 million, let's say. That's a third in 3.5 years. That is a heck of a scaling. That we have 60 assembly plants in the world. Just think about what changes just the assembly side will go through.
Yes, as Jim says, that is a heck of a scaling to go through. Just think of the changes the assembly line has to go through. I am so glad to hear Jim say this, because I made a whole video about the $170 billion challenge that Volkswagen is facing just to refurbish their old ICE factories into EV factories, because it is not the same thing. And here we have Jim answering that question, what keeps you up at night? And it is exactly this point. They have 60 car plants around the world that all have to go through this change. And it took Volkswagen 26 months to refurbish one factory, more than 2 years, with a capacity of 330,000 units and a cost of $1.3 billion to do so. And Ford, as Jim said, has 3.5 years to get to 2 million EVs, because they basically start from zero right now. If they will do very well, they might be able to get to 100,000 EVs this year, and then they have 3 years back to scale up 1.9 million from that. So with that knowledge in mind, as Jim said, it is a huge task and an expensive one. It is not just all the science and R&D and battery technology and software and so on, just the simple fact that roughly 1/3 of Ford's 60 factories has to become EV factories within 3 years. That is 20 factories they have to refurbish within 3 years. 20 factories that might cost $1 billion each to refurbish. That is 20 factories that Ford needs to either train all their existing workers to become EV expert instead, or getting new staff. As Jim has said himself, they lack the talent. So it is not like the person putting together the ICE car can just put together an EV. It is not the same thing. They need training. So no wonder that is the fact that keeps Jim up at night, because it almost seems impossible to do this in time. Because as Jim said, they were all very surprised about how fast this adoption of EV is happening. So Ford is starting to realize we don't have 20 years to make this switch. That is why Ford's target in just 2 years has moved up from 160,000 EVs sold in 2026 to 2 million. Yes, that is actually what their target was just back in 2020. Can you believe it? I made a video about this in 2019 on how fast the adoption was happening, but Ford didn't apparently get it. I mean, what the hell were they looking at? Apparently not the same public available data that I had access to, because as Reuters wrote back in March 2020, internal production plans from other industry sources seen by Reuters support auto forecast numbers, which shows GM and Ford expect to produce about 320 pure electric vehicles powered solely by batteries in North America in 2026. That is nearly 10 times the 35,000 units they have planned to build in 2020, but fewer than the 367,000 Tesla delivered last year. And a funny little observation here is that GM had a plan for 35,000 EVs in 2020, and now they have to ramp up to 2 million in 2025. And no one in the automotive industry or the automotive analysts seem to be questioning this target. But turn back the clock to 2014 when Tesla made about 35,000 EVs, and they said they had a target of only 500,000 units in 2020, 6 years later. That was absurd. But GM ramping up from a target of 35,000 in 2020 to 2 million in just 4 years, well, that is no problem. Probably because many things, but they already have the factories and everything. No, just as we just talked about, they have to refurbish every single factory or build new ones, like Volkswagen is also doing. ICE cars and EVs are not the same thing. It's all about batteries and software, things GM and Ford know nothing about. So it is literally like they have to start from scratch, other than they have some know-how in the manufacturing of a car. So they should do a little better than startups like Tesla did, or like Rivian and Lucid are doing. Even though Rivian, even with all the headwinds, almost produced as many EVs in the first half of 2022 as GM. About 6,000 units for Rivian and about 8,000 units for GM. So pretty embarrassing for GM, and clearly shows us how difficult it is for the old boys to ramp up these EVs. But when they say they will be able to ramp up from 35,000 to 2 million in just 4 years, suddenly out of the blue more than 12x their target, no one seems to raise an eyebrow. But when Tesla wanted to ramp up from 35,000 units to 500,000 units in 6 years, it was absurd. Sure, let's see what magic GM is able to pull off here. But anyway, back to the numbers GM and Ford had back in 2020. So 320,000 combined by Ford and GM. So let's just split that in two and say they both planned just 2 years ago to only produce 160,000 EVs in 2026. Which line up with Ford doubling their target for the Mach-E and the F-150 Lightning twice just last year. This really shows us the lack of understanding and commitment that GM and Ford really had to the EVs just 2 years ago. And it just stands in a very big contrast to what someone like GM and Ford has been saying to the public for so many years. Like Ford's executive chairman Bill Ford told Detroit Auto Show back in 2018, "We are all in on this. We are taking our mainstream vehicles, our most iconic vehicles, and we'll electrify them." And 2 years later, in 2020, they still only had a plan for 160,000 units in 2026. What a pathetic all-in EV goal they had in mind if it had not been for Tesla. And just remember, Tesla sold 367,000 EVs in 2019. So the GM and Ford EV target combined for 2026 and 2020 was lower than what Tesla made a year earlier. I mean, come on. So no wonder that someone like CNBC's Phil LeBeau started to say in 2021, it is time for action, because they have been talking for years and showed nothing. Remember, GM have had their all-in EV mantra, zero emission, since 2017. Yeah, talk is cheap, and even CNBC got tired of hearing them talk and wanted to see execution. And here we are in 2022, and GM sold 8,000 EVs in the first half of the year. Yeah, still all talk. So if it hadn't been for Tesla and the apparently surprising demand for EVs that has forced Ford to raise their target from 160,000 to 2 million in 2026, they would still have that target. But the problem for Ford is, of course, not just the factories and the production line they have to make these huge changes to. They should also have 12x their battery contract and their contracts for raw materials for those batteries, since they have just raised their target 12-fold in just 2 years. But that does not seem to be the case, so I'll be very surprised if Ford can pull this one off by 2026, let alone GM, that now has that target for 2025. Because they only have 2.5 years left to go from literally nothing to 2 million, but does not seem to share Jim Farley's worries about this huge task that is in front of them. But I think that's because GM is in a paradigm paralysis that I made a whole video about, and if you haven't seen that one already, you should. I personally think it's one of my best videos, but being in a paradigm paralysis just means that they can't see the data in front of them because it simply doesn't fit their world view, their beliefs. But that is a big and dangerous problem. But it will not be the first time we see GM talk about EV production and not hit their targets. Back in 2017, GM promised us 20 EV models by 2022. So they have about 4 months left to deliver those 20 EV models. Yeah, that's not going to happen either. But it's not just the manufacturing that is similar to the Nokia story that we just looked at, as they wrote back in 2010. Leading position in emerging market and strong manufacturing and sales network is the key strengths for the company. Yes, again, that is also what we have heard for more than 5 years, that one of the Legacy's advantages was their dealership network. Both Tesla short sellers and legacy automakers and automotive analysts have been saying this through the years. But of course also Bill Fox, the chairman of National Automobile Dealers Association. So of course he's a little bit biased, but he said back in 2015 that selling online would never work and that dealerships were essential to the car business. And today, Tesla has sold more than 3 million cars online, and we see Ford fighting with all their dealerships because they put like 50% market adjustment price on top of the price of their electric vehicles like the F-150 Lightning and the Mach-E. So Ford has said it themselves, they will go 100% online sales strategy with its EVs. And Volvo is also doing this, and more will follow if they want to compete. As Jim has said in one of their earnings call, that Ford has a big price disadvantage to Tesla because of their dealerships and advertising, which he estimates to be around $2,000 per vehicle because of the dealership. I personally think that sounds very low, as we have seen dealers putting on like $10,000 or $30,000 on top of an F-150 Lightning, and about $600 to $700 per vehicle in advertising. So those two simple facts will give Ford a price disadvantage of $2,600 to $2,700 per car, according to Jim. So if you want to compete in the future car market, you have to stop using dealerships. Dealerships have become just yet another weight around the automotive's lake, and they will fight with blood and tears to stay alive, but their bankruptcy is inevitable, as everyone is copying Tesla's online business model, and we will only have showrooms, repair shops, and service centers left in the future. So I just thought it was very funny to see this article being so similar to the article we saw from the analyst about Nokia only 3 years before they died. But probably no similarities here, just pure coincidence, right? And thank you for watching, and until next time, take care out there and be nice.